Borsellino Kizaru is possibly the most interesting and fleshed out admiral in the entirety of One Piece, with him perfectly embodying the corrupt essence of what it means to be an officer of the world government's navy, carrying out his orders gleefully and with next to zero disposition, even if it means harming those he loves and cares about. In stark contrast, most vice captains in the series like Zoro, Rayleigh, and even Beppo would give their lives in order to protect the leader of their crew, which has put them at odds against some of the strongest characters in the series, including Kizaru himself. However, like most battles between top tiers in One Piece, any interaction between the Admiral and said vice captains has been cut short, leaving us as fans to come up with our own conclusions on how these battles would go. Which is why in today's video, we'll be doing just that. To kick things off, we'll be talking about Kizaru versus the GOAT, Beppo. And I don't really think I need to talk about this one, since bro literally one-shot Blackbeard, therefore he should have no problem doing the same thing to Bozaru, giving the vice captain of the Heart Pirates the win with low difficulty. Moving on to our next number 2, we have Killer, and while he's far from the weakest vice captain in the series, he'd still ultimately be no match for Kizaru. This is due to the fact that the Admiral is relative to the same Gear 4 stake man Luffy, who was doing way more damage than Killer against a stronger version of Kaido, giving Kizaru the outright win in this fight with no difficulty. Skipping forward, the next matchup we need to go over is Kizaru versus the vice captain of the Big Mom Pirates, Katakuri. And even though it baffles me that I even have to explain this shit, for some odd fucking reason this 40-year-old man has a legion of brain-dead followers who would even put him above someone like Zoro. Unfortunately though, the reality for Katakuri is that due to power cliffing, you can't even get this nigga past ulti or Usopp nowadays, let alone anywhere near Admiral level, giving the weed man another easy W. On to our next vice captain though, Kizaru's next opponent is the Flame Emperor, Sabo. And while I know that there's a million different takes on bro's scaling, ranging from people thinking he's weaker than Cobra to stronger than Kaido, I think Sabo is most consistently around the same level as someone like Sanji. The reason I say this is because Sabo is essentially just a better version of Ace, the same guy who was able to rival Akainu and Aokiji for brief periods of time, similar to how Sanji was fast and strong enough to block Kizaru's fruit powers. On top of already scaling to Ace though, Sabo himself was also able to clash Devil Fruit powers with Fujitora and managed to withstand his Gravity Blade, which is extremely relevant as Fujitora through his title of Admiral is stated to be relative to Kizaru. This would then theoretically give Sabo enough power to clash with the Admiral for a brief period of time, but that's all he'd be able to do. Especially when you consider a blatantly holding back Fujitora was implied to be winning their fight and quite literally let Sabo go to be evaded in the events of Dressrosa. Therefore, I'm pretty sure everyone and their mom can agree that while Sabo isn't weak and won't be getting one shot by Kizaru by any means, once the Admiral starts going all out, bro is getting sent straight to see Ace. Moving on to our next vice captain, Kizaru's opponent this time around will be Shiryu of the Rain, who like Sabo is either severely underrated by the community or vastly overrated depending on what agendas need to be upheld. However, if you were to ask me personally, while I definitely don't think the guy is ass, I still believe anyone who thinks bro is actually stronger than Kuzan and the Admirals based on one statement of him being the strongest in Blackbeard's crew are absolute crayon-eating bozos. Especially when you factor in that bro got knocked out in one hit by Garp with no haki, while Kuzan was able to withstand multiple Conqueror's coded attacks. Making it pretty clear this statement is only in regards to Blackbeard's actual crew, with Kuzan most likely being a spy who simply infiltrated the ranks. That said though, I don't think it's all doom and gloom when it comes to Shiryu's scaling, as there's a valid argument that by the end of the series he needs to be at least as strong as Ben Beckman, who we've seen threaten Kizaru, as well as Zoro, who we know is going to be one of the strongest characters in this series by the time it's over. Which all but ensures the vice captain's ascension to Admiral level at some point, but as of now I'd still have to say we don't have anywhere near enough evidence to put Shiryu above Big Dog Borsellino. Now that we've gone over Shiryu though, the next right-hand man Kizaru will be facing is someone we've already seen him have a short scuffle with, Marco the Phoenix. And in this scuffle, it was shown that while Marco could use his Phoenix abilities to neutralize the Admiral's Devil Fruit powers, it was also made abundantly clear that he lacked the necessary AP to do any real damage to Kizaru, which is a double-edged sword. Also, before any Yonko glazers tried to bring up databook scans of Marco supposedly fighting evenly with the Admirals, I urge you to pull your head out of your ass and realize that this statement is simply hyping up Marco's abilities to contend with the Admirals at points during the war, not that he's dead even with the Admirals in combat. As once again it's made very clear that while Marco has very good defense and speed, his lack of AP holds him back from true top tier status, which just means that as soon as Marco runs out of stamina like he did against King and Queen, Kizaru will instantly just shoot beams through the Vice Admiral's chest the same way he did at Marineford, except this time, he'd finish the job. After Marco, though, the next Vice Captain we need to go over is King the Wildfire, who like Marco possesses elite defensive abilities. As in his fight with Zoro, we saw that the Lunarian was essentially invincible with his flames on regardless of what attack was thrown his way, and only lost once trying to harm Zoro, which required him to turn his flames off. On top of his near invincibility though, King is also no slouch when it comes to strength either, as not only was he able to parry hits with the King of Hell Zoro, but Zoro himself states that King with an unnamed fire explosion could have killed him if he didn't use Haki, which is a feat that even Hybrid Kaido couldn't pull off with his Thunder Bagua. And while I'm well aware of the fact that this feat doesn't exactly put King on Kaido's level in terms of strength, it should still make it clear that King's AP is well above the average Yonko commander like Marco, and that he should be strong enough to clash with the Admiral similar to how Sabo and Ace did in their exchanges with Aokiji and Fujitora. However, despite the fact that King would cause difficulties for Kizaru due to possessing both great defensive and offensive attributes, at the end of the day he was still beaten by Zoro relatively easily once he figured out that King needed to turn his flames off to actually defeat him. Which means that as soon as bro tries to inflict any real damage on Kizaru, all the Admiral would have to do is time a mutual strike, and within a few hits this fight is going to be over just like the rest, giving Kizaru the win against the number 2 of the Beast Pirates with mid difficulty. Now that I've gone over all of the clear wins for Kizaru though, we can now start talking about characters that actually pose a real threat to the Admiral, starting off with someone we've already seen match Borsalino on equal footing, the Dark King Silver's Rayleigh. With the first thing I want to establish being the fact that in no way was Kizaru suppressed against Rayleigh in their fight on Sabaody. Since Admiral fanboys have been coming up with insane reasons on why Kizaru wasn't giving the exchange his best effort, like saying the Admiral was using a sword which isn't his specialty, even though it's a named attack we've seen him use several times, or that he didn't spam useless light beams that everyone and their mother has blocked, or even crazier arguments suggesting he was trying to protect the island, even though this nigga 5 chapters prior blew up a grove tree for fucking fun. Furthermore, it's directly stated by a reliable source in Sentomaru that Rayleigh stopped the Admiral in his tracks and that his uncle simply couldn't get past the old man, which is even further cemented by us being told that Kizaru captured 500 pirates to vent his frustrations for failing in Sabaody. So I think you guys get the point. Admiral fans will grasp at anything to over-exaggerate the strength of Kizaru, despite the fact that he was clearly displayed to be on the same level as old Rayleigh, with him only having the slight edge due to Rayleigh's self-admittedly lacking stamina. Having said that, this isn't even remotely an anti-scale for the Vice Captain, since even as a 76-year-old man past his prime who doesn't have any fruit powers or a special sword like Enma, was nearly evenly matched with Kizaru for an extensive period of time, and even managed to avoid being captured by the Admiral, even though he had access to all of his abilities. Therefore, if we bring up Prime Rayleigh in this discussion, then the fight takes a completely different turn, as it's been reiterated over and over again that despite being powerhouses that the old people in One Piece have still most definitely fallen off compared to their prime selves, which would indefinitely put Prime Rayleigh above Kizaru in terms of strength, whether it be by a little or a lot, and it would also mean that the Vice Captain wouldn't have to worry about a lack of stamina, thereby flipping the script and giving Prime Rayleigh the blatant win over the Admiral in my opinion. Also, before I move on, I also want to address this databook scan floating around that says old Rayleigh hadn't lost any strength compared to his prime, which is just blatantly wrong for multiple reasons. First off, like I've already mentioned, we've been told over and over again that legends in One Piece ultimately regress with age and aren't what they used to be, which Rayleigh quite literally says about himself in addition to him lacking stamina. Therefore, it would be absolute hypocrisy to take this statement at face value just because it was stated in a databook, especially when there are statements like Marco rivaling the Admirals which can be used to make the same bad arguments that are blatantly contradicted by the manga when taken out of context. The second and most blatant reason this statement is incorrect though is because it's not the original translation of the statement and is instead sourced from the French version of Databook Blue, which is already a translation of the Japanese version. And while this on its own wouldn't make the statement invalid, when you translate the raw kanji of the original statement you can clearly see no mention of Rayleigh being just as strong as in his prime, but rather that his strength is still undoubtable in old age, with this again being something that we're told repeatedly, giving me reason to believe that this translation was clearly done by an Admiral fan with ulterior motives, as I've also consistently seen other YouTubers make the argument that old characters are just as strong as in their primes, and only suffer from a lack of stamina to uplift their agendas that have zero consistency within the narrative. With my rant concluded and evaluation on Rayleigh vs Kizaru finished though, we can now move on to the next and possibly most interesting matchup of the video, which is Kizaru vs Zoro. And even though I unironically used to push the take that this fight isn't even close, I've come around to the idea that while the points that I was making before weren't exactly concrete, the basis of my arguments on why Zoro could compete with the Admirals still definitely have some merit. Because if some of you don't recall, Zoro before gaining access to King of Hell was able to outspeed and permanently scarred Hybrid Kaido with 9-sword style Ashura. This is impressive because while Kaido has shown that he's more than capable of holding back his full power in terms of strength, when it comes to durability there's no active way for the strongest creature to limit himself aside from turning off his devil fruit powers or shielding himself with Haki, both of which we've never seen him do in the middle of battle. Meaning there's literally zero way to downplay this insane feat that is arguably above Gear 5 level in terms of raw AP before Zoro even unlocked King of Hell and got stronger. Which is pretty consistent when you recall the fact that Zoro was able to blitz and scar Awaken Lucci, which is again arguably above Gear 5 level in terms of pure damage. That being said, while I think Zoro is in the same ballpark as and arguably even exceeds Gear 5 Luffy without his Bajrank gun in terms of AP, I still don't think he's exactly as fast as Luffy or Kaido, considering Kaido most likely wasn't moving as fast as against Ashura Zoro, as well as the fact that Zoro needed advanced Conqueror's Haki to outspeed Awaken Lucci, while Gear 5 Luffy was able to do it casually with no Haki, making Zoro more so around as fast as Gear 4 Snake Man as opposed to Gear 5, but still giving him the speed and strength necessary to seriously engage with the Admirals, which could likely end up with him scarring Borsalino the same way he did Kaido. However, with that being said, I still ultimately have Kizaru taking the win against Zoro with high difficulty, since not only would he be able to blitz the swordsman with his accelerated speed, but we've also seen that the Admiral could tank several of Gear 5 Luffy's attacks while sustaining minimal lasting damage, and that other Admirals like Akainu and Aokiji can withstand hits from the likes of Garp and Old Whitebeard, who arguably exceed Gear 5 Luffy in terms of AP, making it pretty clear that Kizaru should be capable of surviving being heavily injured by Zoro and would eventually just outlast the number 2 of the Straw Hats, but it would be with extreme difficulty. With Zoro out of the way though, Kizaru's final and arguably strongest opponent aside from Prime Rayleigh is Ben Beckman. And even though I already know half of you morons are going to be commenting about how Beckman is a featless databook merchant, I genuinely just need anyone who thinks this to understand that you don't need 100 plus chapters of combat to have feats. Since even statements about a character's ability or standing in the world can be considered as a narrative feat within itself, making it to where said character doesn't even have to lift a finger to be scaled over another. Also, I really don't understand the standpoint on Beckman having no feats, since the Vice Captain's most notable one occurred during Marineford when he threatened and halted Kizaru from destroying the submarine Luffy was on, which yes, is a feat. Also, regardless of whether Kizaru later goes on to still attack the submarine, this still doesn't change the fact that Kizaru felt threatened enough to halt his actions the first time around, due to understanding how strong Beckman is. Since in context, Beckman harming or attacking Kizaru would be counterproductive to the task at hand, which is stopping the Paramount War. While Kizaru on the other hand knows for a fact that he won't face any repercussions for going for one last hit, which even dumbass pirates acknowledge on the same page this event takes place. So yes, Ben Beckman was a genuine threat to Kizaru in this interaction, and no, the Admiral was not trolling. With this also being expressed to us over and over through not only databook and Weaver card statements, but also in Film Red where we basically see the same interaction taking place. And while I know that Film Red isn't canon to One Piece's timeline, it is stated that feats portrayed in the movie are an accurate representation of the Red Hair Pirate's abilities, making it pretty much undeniable that Beckman is at least on Kizaru's level, if not slightly stronger. This logic is also pretty consistent when you consider Beckman at full power has to be at least as strong as old Rayleigh and current Zoro by the end of the story for it to function properly, making a fight between Beckman and Kizaru an extremely difficult fight for both parties involved, which is why I could see it going either way. But these are all just my opinions at the end of the day, and either way you slice it, Kizaru is absolutely wrecking most vice captains in the series, and even gives the strongest ones absolute hell even if you think he loses, which just goes to show you how much aura this man actually has, and is also why he's my favorite admiral in the series. So if you're like me and want to hear more Kizaru glaze, be sure to check out this video on the Admirals versus the Gorosei, where I go over how he matches up against Saturn. Also, while you're at it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more One Piece content, as it's a win-win for both of us. With all that being said though guys, I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.